All right, everyone, I'm going to give you a quick news recap. I thought I'd do it independent of the interviews. So you're in the loop for today. So when I do the rest of the interviews today, you know the latest developments. Probably the most important thing that has happened so far is Iran reportedly dropped its demand that the Hormuz blockade be lifted before talks begin. So you know how I've been very critical of Iran, saying, look, Trump wants to off-ramp, just give him the off-ramp, let's end the war. I'm not saying concede something significant, but give him something so he can walk away and label it as a win for his voters. And Iran is doing that. They're showing they're willing to concede. They've said, hey, we're going to discuss the sanctions relief, and the blockade, and we'll discuss those now, even if your blockade is not lifted. So our control of the Strait of Hormuz and your sanctions, which seems like a very fair negotiation. If Iran, if they request the lifting of some of the sanctions so their economy can breathe again and their people stop suffering, in return for Iran maybe conceding their control of the Strait of Hormuz, or not charging a fee, not charging a toll, that seems like a good deal. And for Iran to be open to discuss this even without the blockade being lifted, that's a very significant concession. So I'm surprised that Trump does not want to, for him to reject that. That's not a good sign. If Trump is really looking for peace, he doesn't want to continue the war, he should be accepting this deal. So that's the first piece of development that gets me concerned. But instead of being concerned on the Iranian side, they seem to be willing to concede. And Trump, and there's another piece of information there that here and now I'm going to read out that adds to that concern. But Trump may not really want peace. And I know some of you might be like, Mario, of course, it's pretty obvious. Now, I'd be surprised. I'd really be surprised, considering the state of the U.S. military, the state of the global economy, the state of the Republican Party and Trump and the polls. Putting all these together, the war just doesn't make sense. So I'd be very surprised if he does want to go back to war. I think he's just twisting Iran's arm, thinking the blockade is working and he wants more concessions from them. That's what my guess would be. But if he doesn't accept to continue the negotiations with the blockade remaining, which Iran accepted, that would be wild. Number two, which is another piece of bad news when it comes to the negotiations. Trump just added a maximum pressure hawk to his Iran negotiating team. Nick Stewart, who's the chief of staff of the Iran Action Group during Trump's first presidency, and most recently at the hawkish FDD, who I've had a few guests from the FDD, the think tank, has joined Steve Witkoff's peace envoy office. FDD has spent years opposing any diplomatic deal with Iran and backing Israel's military positions. Stewart championed the sanctions and isolation playbook, not the compromise one. Talks are already deadlocked over Iran's nuclear program, the Strait of Hormuz, and the regional proxies. You don't bring someone with that background if you're close to reaching a peace deal. So that's Trita Parsi was posting about this as well. I'm going to have him on the show soon. But for someone to bring someone from the Foundation of Defense of Democracies onto the negotiation, that is surprising. Like, if Trump is looking at it, doesn't mean Trump doesn't want peace. That's just one person on the negotiating table. But maybe he's looking for someone who's a bit more hawkish on the negotiating table. Maybe he's posturing. It could be a lot of explanations, but it's not a good sign. That's for sure. So that's another piece of development that shows that in the last 48 hours is showing that the U.S. side is less willing to concede. And the Iranians, they're preparing for war. You've got Iran's military says it expects the U.S. to attack again and is fully prepared for it. The Iranian senior commander says U.S. ceasefire talks is media theater designed to keep oil prices down and not genuine commitment of peace. You've got the deputy commander of Iran's military headquarters, Mohammad Jafar al-Sadi, quote, the actions and statements of U.S. officials are primarily media-driven, aimed first at preventing a drop in oil prices and second, extricating themselves from the mess they've created. The armed forces are fully prepared for the new adventures and foolishness from the Americans. So you got Trump saying he's not willing to negotiate. He's not happy with Iran wanting to negotiate the sanctions in order for them to give up their control of the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't understand, what is Trump expecting? He's expecting the Iranians to give up their control of the only leverage they have to be able to get some reparations after they face hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damages and not give any concessions in return. Either that's just now he's got a maximalist demand that's very, very foolish, or he's not, he's preparing for a continuation of the war. Like, the decision's been made for a prolonged war until the U.S. has control of the Strait of Hormuz or achieves regime change. And that's always been the case. and the ceasefire is just a way for the US to rearm. If honestly, if that's the case, that's freaking wild. That is political suicide for Trump. That is disastrous for the US military that's already running very low on stockpiles. Global economy screwed. US allies are going to be pissed, and they're already pissed now. Trump has already said he's going to withdraw troops from Germany. So the Pentagon's withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany over the next 6 to 12 months after Merz said that US was humiliated in Iran. So you add all these together, it just sounds like a complete disaster from a geopolitical standpoint for the US. It already is a disaster. This war continues. I cannot begin to explain the repercussions. The world is already going to look very different, but it would look, I can't even begin to imagine how the world would look like if this war continues. The Gulf would be in a very difficult position, very, very difficult position. If Iran attacks them again, attacks their energy infrastructure, they're not prepared for a continuation of the war. Israel would be in a difficult spot again because they'll be facing a multi-front war as well. The U.S. economy, especially the U.S. military, would be stretched extremely thin. The European economy is not prepared for it. Asian economies are going to be pummeled. I was just speaking to someone from Pakistan earlier. They said, Mario, there's already massive rationing happening. There's no petrol available. People are working from home. So Australia, my home country, is already struggling as well in getting petrol there, getting, I think, diesel fuel. There's shortages there. The Chinese economy will suffer. Millions of people, as the UN Secretary General said yesterday, millions of people would be impacted, would go into famine. Even if the war does not break out again, if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed for another few weeks, millions of people will go into famine because of the fertilizer shortage. So it'll be catastrophic for the world. Now, the blockade, is that working? Well, CENTCOM just put out a statement in the last few minutes. Over the past 20 days, 48 vessels have been redirected to ensure compliance with the blockade. Now, we don't know who these 48 vessels are. 48 vessels in 20 days. Actually, let me see how significant that is. Let me ask Grok how many vessels Iran sends out before the war. Before the war, how many vessels? So I'll give you guys facts instead of making shit up. How many vessels did Iran send through Hormuz per 28 days? All right, let me get you the exact number, and then we could first. I'm not sure if you want to believe the CENTCOM numbers because we're getting a lot of conflicting reports on how well the blockade is working. I had Nima on the show earlier. He said, Mario, the blockade is a complete failure. Larry Johnson said the same thing last night. I have him on later tonight as well. But I'll look at the metrics coming out of CENTCOM. Now, Trump is saying the blockade is working 100%. It's suffocating Iran's economy. Now, there might be truth to it. We are getting reports that Iran's storage facilities are running out and they're starting to deploy old vessels, old cargo ships they have to hold some of that oil that's coming out of their wells in the sea, in the Persian Gulf, because their underground storage facilities are running out. But yeah, 28 days for them to intercept only 48 vessels. Well, before the war, approximately 560 vessels were coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Total Hormuz traffic was 100 to 140 vessels per day. So according to CENTCOM's numbers, guys, let me tell my team about this. Guys, the blockade seems to be failing miserably based on CENTCOM's own numbers. Because according to Grok, 560 a month. That's what the number usually is. And some people are saying Iran was exporting even more oil throughout the war because the world was desperate for their oil, because they knew there'll be a blockade. So they might have been shipping out even more than 560 through the war. So for the blockade to only be impacting 48 vessels is the US essentially saying, hey, the blockade is not working. And we're only intercepting, 10% of their vessels. Satellite imagery reportedly shows Iran still loading tankers at Karg Island, despite White House claims that the country's oil system is near collapse. I think we all knew that their oil system is not near collapse, but for them to be loading tankers at Karg Island. Now, that could indicate one or two things. One is those tankers are coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, why would they be loading them? That's number one. The other option is they're loading old tankers, as I said earlier, because their facilities are running at capacity. So that's an update on the effectiveness or the lack of effectiveness of the blockade. There's another report here that my team wrote from Axios. The Pentagon just put a number of what the blockade has cost Iran, nearly $5 billion in lost oil revenue. The Defense Department has estimates show the U.S. blockade in the Gulf of Oman has denied Iran roughly $5 billion in oil revenue since launch on April 13. All right, so let's see what that is. April 13, that's 3 weeks ago. Let me see how much Iran was making. How much was Iran making per week in oil revenue before the war? So let's see if, again, the report by the Pentagon, how effective the blockade has been. Because they said that's a claim, that they've blocked $5 billion worth of oil revenue since April 13th. So in about 3 weeks. So they make $800 million per week. So that's a pretty significant number if that number is true. But that doesn't add up with the number we saw earlier, the number of cargo ships that were seized of the blockade. But let me keep reading the report, and you guys could decide what you want to believe. You know my stance. 31 tankers laden with 53 million barrels of Iranian crude are physically stuck in the Gulf, unable to reach buyers. 2 have been seized by U.S. forces. More than 40 total vessels have been redirected, attempting to break through. The crisis on the Iranian side keeps deepening. Onshore storage is approaching capacity. Iran has started using older tankers as floating storage just to keep producing. Some shipments are now taking longer. Coastliner routes to reach China to avoid American interdiction. The system designed to evade sanctions for years is breaking under pressure, designed to compress the timeline to weeks. Eurasia Group's analyst Gregory Brew estimates Iran in several weeks or perhaps as much as a month away from running out of storage. Once that hits, Iran has to choose between shutting off its production, which permanently damages oil fields with low pressure, or attempting what tankertrackers.com co-founder Samir Madani calls a great escape, which I think is a lot of tankers heading through the blockade all at once and some of them getting through. As experts have said on my show, there isn't enough destroyers there, enough vessels, U.S. vessels, to be able to intercept so many cargo ships. So Iran could be preparing a lot of their cargo ships to try to break the blockade all at once. The scenario is the wild card. Dozens of fully loaded super tankers attempting simultaneous jailbreak from Iranian waters would force the U.S. Navy to choose between firing on civilian ships, allowing major sanctions evasion, or some combination of both. There is no good outcome from a great escape once it starts. The Pentagon's framing was unusually direct. Acting Press Secretary Joel Valdez, he said the following: the blockade is operating with full force and delivering the decision impact we intended, blah, blah, blah. So the Pentagon is saying it's working. Now, how do you guys make sense of the numbers from the US that is coming out of CENTCOM? Because I said to you guys, there's about 500 vessels coming out per month on average, 560, and CENTCOM said we've only intercepted 10% of them. So the blockade must be failing. Not necessarily, because there's a lot of things that could be coming out of Iran. So are they focusing on the oil tankers that are coming out? That's what the 48 vessels are. And if you look at the numbers that is coming out of the White House, it is pretty significant. Let's see what is the value of 48 tankers coming out, tankers of oil being exported. Let's see. So I'm just making sure that the numbers coming out of the White House, of CENTCOM in the White House, the claims are all, whether they're accurate or not. But from everyone I've spoken to, because remember, guys, there's some people that say Iran could withstand this for months. They've been preparing this for a long time. Others say that Iran's capacity is days away from facing significant issues. Now, one way to see which one is more true. All right, so 48 tankers is about $7 billion worth of oil. So it does seem to be accurate. If CENTCOM's claim is correct of 48 tankers, it does not mean... All right. I'm trying to get more information on this for you guys. But it does not mean Yeah, so it does not mean that the blockade is not working. 48 tankers are all oil tankers. That does equal about $5 billion. That's a significant amount of money for Iran. So if these numbers are true, and you've got every reason to doubt it, if these numbers are true, then the blockade is working. And if you look at the actions on the Iranian side, Iranians were adamant for the blockade to be lifted, and they've made a lot of threats if the blockade is not lifted. And now they've folded and said, hey, we're going to accept to negotiate even if the blockade is not lifted. Now, when I asked certain guests, they said, Mario, the reason they folded and kept the blockade is because actually they had no good explanation for that. The reason they were making all the threats about the blockade is because it's more about pride rather than economic reasons. I think that's not the reason. I think it is pragmatic reasons. I think the blockade is working. From all the discussions that I've had, it is working, not as well as the CENTCOM claims, of course, but it is working. And I think the Iranian economy is suffering and was suffering before this blockade. So Iran is in a tough position, but so is the rest of the world. But the US economy is doing pretty well. The US does not depend on the Strait of Hormuz. So Trump is in a position right now where he's sacrificing the economies of his allies in Asia and in Europe to give him leverage on the negotiating table. If it is working, that is a good sign. The reason it's a good sign is Trump has an option to seek concessions that is not military action. So as long as the blockade is working, there's less reasons for Trump to seek kinetic strikes again on Iran, and less likelihood the war will continue, and a higher likelihood that there will be some sort of agreement between the two sides. So my conclusion from all this and from the hours of discussions I do daily is that the economic blockade is working, not as well as CENTCOM claims. And that is already forcing Iran for concessions, as we saw in yesterday's report. Trump has not accepted Iran's concessions yesterday for one or two reasons that I don't know which one it is. My guess is the first one. The first one is he wants more pressure on Iran, so he's letting the blockade remain there for longer before he accepts to negotiate. Or number two, he's made up his mind. He wants to strike Iran. He wants the war to continue until he achieves regime change or a lifting of the blockade. My assumption is still on number one. I think the blockade is working, and I think Trump wants more leverage in the negotiations. So that's an update on the blockade. There's another piece of information here. The White House says the oil system is days away from collapse. Satellites disagree. Kharg Island is still loading tankers, including at least one VLCC as of May 1st. So that's the claim of the oil infrastructure in Iran being near complete collapse, and satellite imagery showing otherwise. All right, so that's the latest updates on Iran. Iran is offering concessions. Trump is refusing. The rhetoric out of Iran is that we're prepared for war. The military buildup on the American side, which I went through yesterday, is significant. So there's a lot of reasons to believe that war is imminent, but I'm still leaning to these are all part of the negotiations, and the negotiations are progressing, not as well as one would hope, but they are progressing. Now, on the Lebanese front, Hezbollah is having significant success. Lisa, I'm going to send you through a quick link if you can play that for the audience. All right, I might need to wrap this quickly. We do have a guest that is joining in 4 minutes. I thought I'd do a longer recap for you guys, but we do have Steve Hank, that will be the Professor Hank, that will be coming in to discuss the economic impact of the blockade. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick update on Lebanon first, and a few other. I'll do the rest of the updates pretty quickly, and then we'll have Steve on the show. So if you play that video, it just shows the successes that Hezbollah is having on the Lebanese front through their drone warfare. And we have, so their fiber optic FPVs are causing significant damage to the Israeli soldiers. There's a lot of soldiers that are pulling out of South Lebanon. The war is not ending, but they're pulling out because they are facing significant casualties. That's one of the videos they've released. So that's on the Lebanese front. On the military build-up side, I've talked about it as well. There's USS Boxers heading from the Strait of Malacca. About 2 days ago, has 2,500 Marines on board. It's a full amphibious assault ship that is heading to CENTCOM right now. More indicators that there's a pretty significant military build-up happening. Other pieces of information, we know the disagreement between the US and NATO, especially Germany, with their comments. Well, Trump has just announced he'll be withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany. And the last piece of update before I end this, so we can do the interview in a few minutes with Professor Hank, is the Gulf. The US State Department just approved $8.6 billion in major military sales to Israel, Qatar, Kuwait, and the UAE. So we're seeing now the split in the Gulf and a lot of the countries doubling down on their relationship with the US. They've ordered $4 billion worth of Patriot missiles, $1 billion worth of APKWs munitions, to Qatar, $2.5 billion of integrated battle command system to Kuwait, $100 million worth of munitions to Israel, sorry, $1 billion, $900 million, and $150 million to the UAE. Again, munitions as well. If you put all these together, significant orders from the Gulf, but the only issue is the capacity. The US is at capacity. They've delayed a lot of deliveries to Europe as well. They've delayed deliveries that have already been placed by the Gulf as well. So even though those orders are being made, there's a significant weakness on the manufacturing capacity in America's military-industrial complex. But that order gives you an idea of which countries are doubling down on their relationship with the US and which others are diversifying more and seeking alliances with Turkey and Pakistan, and that's mainly Saudi. So that's a bit of a recap for you guys. We'll be going live again in a few minutes with Professor Hank to discuss the economic impact of the war. I'll see you soon.